The dust devil came out of nowhere, spinning across the New Mexico desert like a furious ghost. Jake Morgan pulled his hat down tight and squinted through the swirling sand, guiding his horse along the ridge trail he'd ridden 1,000 times before. 28 years old, weathered beyond his years, Jake had learned the hard way that the desert was both beautiful and merciless. He'd lost his parents to a flash flood when he was just 17, leaving him to run their small ranch alone. The land had taught him to be cautious, to read the signs, to trust his instincts. That's why he nearly rode past her. At first, he thought it was just another trick of the fading light, shadows playing across the red rocks. But then he saw her again, a figure in white, stumbling near the canyon rim, one hand pressed against the rock face for support. Jake's heart lurched. Nobody should be out here on foot, especially not in weather like this, with darkness coming on fast and a storm brewing in the distance. "Hey," he called out, spurring his horse forward. "You all right?" The figure turned, and Jake caught his breath. Even through the dust and dying light, he could see she was young, maybe 20, with long dark hair whipping in the wind. Her dress, if you could call it that, was torn and muddy, hanging off one shoulder. Blood stained the white fabric near her side. Her face was streaked with dirt, her eyes wide with what he assumed was fear or pain. She didn't answer. Instead, she stumbled, her legs giving way beneath her. Jake was off his horse in an instant, catching her just before she hit the ground. She was lighter than he expected, her skin burning with fever beneath his hands. "It's okay," he murmured, easing her down gently. "I've got you. You're safe now." She said something he couldn't understand, words that flowed like water over stones, musical and foreign. Her eyes fluttered closed, and panic gripped his chest. He'd seen what the desert could do to people caught out in it unprepared. Dehydration, heat stroke, exposure, any of them could kill. He didn't think. He just acted. Lifting her carefully into his arms, he settled her across his saddle, then swung up behind her, cradling her against his chest. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he could feel her shallow breathing, the heat radiating from her skin. "Hold on," he whispered, even though she couldn't hear him. "Just hold on." The ride back to his ranch took 30 minutes that felt like hours. Jake kept one arm wrapped around the woman, the other guiding his horse through the gathering darkness. He talked to her the whole way, about nothing, really. The weather. His horse. His dog. Anything to fill the terrible silence, to convince himself she was still breathing. When the lights of his ranch finally came into view, relief flooded through him. It wasn't much, a small house, a barn, a few outbuildings scattered across the property, but it was home, and more importantly, it was safe. He carried her inside, kicking the door open and laying her gently on his couch. In the lamplight, he could see her more clearly now. She was beautiful, with high cheekbones and smooth bronze skin. The blood on her dress looked worse than he'd thought, and he wondered what had happened to her. A car accident? Had she been thrown from a horse? Attacked? Jake grabbed his first aid kit and a basin of water. He'd patched up enough injured animals and mended enough of his own wounds to know the basics. As he carefully cleaned the blood away from her side, his confusion grew. There was no wound. The blood was there, real, not imagined, but beneath it, her skin was smooth and unmarked. His brow furrowed. Maybe he'd been wrong about where she was hurt. He checked her arms, her legs, searching for any sign of injury. Nothing. Not even a scratch. The fever was real, she was burning up, but there was no obvious cause, no trauma he could treat. "What happened to you?" he whispered, sitting back on his heels. She stirred, her eyes opening slowly. For a moment, she stared at him, and he saw something in her gaze that wasn't fear or confusion. It was something else entirely. Something that made his stomach flip. Then she smiled, a small, knowing smile, and closed her eyes again. Jake spent the night keeping watch over her, cooling her forehead with damp cloths, making sure she stayed hydrated. He'd brought plenty of injured creatures home over the years, orphaned calves, wounded hawks, even a coyote pup once, but this was different. This was a person, a woman, and he felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him like never before. As dawn broke through his windows, painting the room in shades of gold and pink, he finally let himself doze in the chair beside the couch. He dreamed of dust devils and mysterious women, of ancient songs carried on the desert wind. He woke to the sound of someone moving in his kitchen. Jake jerked upright, his heart hammering. The couch was empty. He scrambled to his feet and rushed to the kitchen doorway, then stopped dead. The woman stood at his stove, perfectly healthy, perfectly calm, cooking eggs in his cast-iron skillet. She'd changed out of the torn white dress and was now wearing something else entirely, a traditional Apache dress, beautifully beaded, that she must have had in a bag he hadn't noticed. Her long hair was braided down her back, and she moved through his kitchen with the confidence of someone who belonged there. You're okay," he stammered. She turned to him, and that same knowing smile played at her lips. When she spoke, her English was perfect, though touched with an accent that made each word sound like music. "I am better than okay, Jake Morgan. Thanks to you. How do you know my name?" "The same way I knew you would find me yesterday. The same way I knew you would bring me home." She set the skillet aside and turned to face him fully. "My name is Ayanna. And I have been looking for you for a very long time." Jake felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. "Looking for me? What are you talking about?" "You were hurt, there was blood." "Not my blood," she said softly. "The blood of a white dove. Part of the ceremony." "What ceremony?" Ayanna moved toward him, her eyes never leaving his face. "Sit down, Jake. Please. I have a story to tell you, and it's going to sound impossible. But every word is true." Jake sat, because his legs suddenly felt like they wouldn't hold him. Ayanna poured 2 cups of coffee, how did she know where he kept everything, and settled into the chair across from him. The morning light caught in her dark eyes, making them seem ancient and young all at once. "My people have lived in these lands for thousands of years," she began. "Long before the Spanish came, before the Americans, before anyone who looks like you ever set foot on this red earth. We learned its secrets. We learned how to listen to what the land was trying to tell us." Jake wanted to interrupt, to demand answers to the dozens of questions crowding his mind, but something in her voice held him silent. "Among my people, there are traditions that go back to the beginning times. Sacred ways. One of them is called the Walk of Recognition." She paused, taking a sip of coffee. "When a woman reaches a certain age, if she has not yet found her match, her true partner, she can ask the elders to perform the ceremony. They prepare her. They paint her with the sacred symbols, though you wouldn't have seen them in the darkness. They give her the white dress of seeking. And then they send her out into the desert to walk until her destined one finds her. That's..." Jake struggled for words. "That's crazy. You could have died out there." "No." Ayanna's voice was firm. "That's not how it works. The ceremony protects the walker. The land itself guides the right person to find her. It has never failed, not in all the generations my grandmother's grandmother's grandmother could remember." Jake shook his head. "So you're telling me you deliberately went out into the desert, pretended to be hurt, all so that, what? So I would bring you here?" "Not pretended. The ceremony required me to take on the appearance of distress, to seem vulnerable, to seem in need. The blood of the white dove creates the illusion of injury. It's a test, Jake. A test of the finder's heart." She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "Do you know how many people would have ridden right past? How many would have seen a native woman in trouble and decided it wasn't their problem? How many would have stopped, but only to take advantage?" Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I'm not special for helping someone who looked hurt. That's just basic human decency." "Exactly." Ayanna's smile was radiant. That's exactly why you're the one. That's why the ceremony led me to you. But I don't understand. I'm just a rancher. I'm nobody important. I'm not even Apache. My great-great-grandmother married a Mexican man, Ayana said calmly. My great-aunt married a black cowboy. My own mother married a white archaeologist. Love doesn't ask about bloodlines, Jake. It asks about the heart. She stood up and walked to his window, looking out over the desert that stretched beyond his property. Do you know the history of this land you live on? It was my parents' ranch. My grandfather bought it in the 50s. Before that, it was owned by a man named Thomas Garrett. Before that, it belonged to a Spanish family. And before that, long before that, this was where my people gathered every spring. There was a sacred spring here, though it's long since dried up. This was a place of new beginnings. She turned back to him. Nothing is an accident, Jake. You live here because you're meant to live here. I walked here because I was meant to find you. Jake stood up, running his hand through his hair. This was insane. All of it. And yet, there was something in her words that resonated with a part of him he'd learned to ignore. The part that sometimes felt the desert speaking to him in the quiet hours. The part that had always felt like he was waiting for something without knowing what. What are you asking me? His voice came out rough. I'm not asking anything. Not yet. Ayana stepped closer to him. The ceremony has brought us together, but what happens next is up to both of us. The tradition says that if the finder brings the walker home, cares for her, shows kindness without expectation of reward, then the walker stays. She becomes part of his life, and he becomes part of hers. But it's not a command. It's an invitation. An invitation to what? To see if what the land knows is what our hearts will discover. To see if the connection the ceremony revealed is real. She was standing right in front of him now, so close he could smell sage and something sweet, like desert flowers after rain. I know this is overwhelming. I know you need time to understand. That's why I'm here. Not as a burden, not as an obligation. But as a possibility. Jake looked into her eyes and saw his own confusion reflected there, but also something else. Hope. The same desperate hope he'd been carrying around for years, the loneliness of running this ranch by himself, eating dinner alone every night, talking to his animals because there was no one else to talk to. How long? He asked quietly. How long do I have to decide? The ceremony lasts 7 days. For 7 days, we live as we would live, I help you with your work, you teach me your ways, we learn each other. At the end of 7 days, at sunset on the 7th day, I will ask you one question. You will answer honestly. And then we'll both know. What question? Ayana smiled. That's part of the mystery. But you'll know the answer when the time comes. You'll know it in your bones. The next 6 days were the strangest and most wonderful of Jake's life. Ayana moved through his home like she'd always been there, but she didn't take over, she complimented. When he went out to feed the cattle, she came with him, asking questions about his operation, learning the names of each animal. When he fixed a broken fence, she held the wire, her hands sure and strong. When evening came and he was exhausted from the day's work, she had dinner ready, not elaborate meals, but good, honest food that tasted like it was made with care. They talked. Oh, how they talked. She told him stories about her childhood on the reservation, about her grandmother who had raised her after her parents died in a car accident. He told her about losing his own parents, about the flood that had swept them away while he watched helplessly from higher ground. They discovered they were both orphans, both shaped by loss, both stronger and more fragile because of it. She taught him words in Apache, he butchered the pronunciation and she laughed, but kindly. He taught her to ride his gentlest horse, and discovered she'd been riding since she was 3 and was just humoring him. They laughed about that, too. At night, she slept in his guest room, the one he'd been using as storage for years. She'd cleaned it out herself, made it into a real space. He lay in his own bed, staring at the ceiling, hyper-aware of her presence in his house. It felt right. It felt like something had been missing all these years, and he'd never known what it was until now. On the 5th day, old Bill Henderson from the neighboring ranch stopped by to drop off a tool he'd borrowed. He took one look at Ayanna and grinned. "Well, Jake Morgan, you've been holding out on us. When did you get married?" Jake opened his mouth to correct him, but Ayanna just laughed. "We're still figuring that out, Mr. Henderson." After Bill left, Jake turned to her. "Why didn't you correct him?" "Because he saw what was true, even if we haven't said it yet." She touched his arm, and the contact sent electricity through him. "Jake, I need to tell you something. The ceremony, it doesn't create love. It can't do that. All it does is remove the barriers that keep destined people from finding each other. The love part, that's real. That's ours. That's what we build together." On the 6th day, they rode out to the ridge where he'd found her. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of crimson and gold. Ayanna dismounted and walked to the edge, looking out over the vast expanse. "My grandmother told me something before I began the walk," she said. "She said, you will know him by how he sees you. Not as a prize to be won or a burden to be carried, but as a mirror of his own best self." Do you understand what she meant? Jake joined her at the edge, their shoulders almost touching. "I think so. When I look at you, I see someone brave enough to walk into the desert alone. Someone kind enough to help a stranger with his work without being asked. Someone strong enough to build a life from nothing." He swallowed hard. "I see someone I want to be worthy of." Ayanna turned to him, tears glistening in her eyes. "And when I look at you, I see a man who stops for strangers. Who brings injured creatures home." The 7th day dawned clear and bright. Jake woke with his stomach in knots, knowing that by sunset, everything would change. Either Ayanna would stay, or she would walk back out into the desert, and he would spend the rest of his life wondering what might have been. He found her in the barn, talking softly to his horse. The animal, normally skittish with strangers, had his head down, nuzzling her hand. Of course. Even the animals knew what Jake was only beginning to accept. "Morning," he said, and his voice cracked. She turned, and the smile she gave him was bittersweet. "Good morning, Jake. Are you ready for today?" "No." "Yes." "I don't know." He laughed, running his hand through his hair. "This is crazy." "It is," she agreed. "But sometimes crazy is just another word for miraculous." They spent the day working side by side, as they had all week. But there was a weight to every moment now, a significance to every glance. When their hands touched passing a tool, the contact lingered. When their eyes met over the morning coffee, whole conversations happened in the silence. Around midday, a truck pulled up, and an older Apache woman climbed out. She was small and weathered, her face a map of smile lines and sun damage. But her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. "Grandmother," Ayanna said, embracing her. So this was the architect of the ceremony. Jake felt suddenly self-conscious, wondering what this woman saw when she looked at him. A worthy partner for her granddaughter? Or just another white man who would eventually disappoint? Jake Morgan. The grandmother's voice was surprisingly strong. "I am Nita. I have heard much about you." "Ma'am." He nodded respectfully. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request. They strolled toward the property line, leaving Ayanna watching from the porch. Nita moved slowly but with purpose, her weathered hands clasped behind her back. "You're afraid," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Fear means you understand what's at stake." She stopped, turning to face him. "You think this ceremony is about magic? About destiny forcing two people together? But that's not what it is. What is it, then? It's about trust. Ayanna trusted the tradition enough to walk into the desert alone. You trusted your own kindness enough to stop and help. And now you both have to trust that what you felt this week is real. Nita's eyes softened. My granddaughter has been alone for a long time, Jake. After her parents died, she closed herself off. She threw herself into her work. She's a teacher on the reservation, did she tell you that? She gives everything to her students, to her community. But she gives nothing to herself. She was disappearing. Becoming a ghost in her own life. Jake felt his throat tighten. He knew that feeling. He'd been living it himself. When she asked to do the walk of recognition, I was happy. Not because I believe in forcing destiny, but because it meant she was ready to let someone in again. To risk being hurt in exchange for the possibility of being loved. Nita reached out and touched his arm. The question she will ask you tonight, it's not a test you can fail. It's a doorway you can choose to walk through or not. Either answer is acceptable. Either answer is honest. All the ceremony asks is that you speak your truth. What if my truth hurts her? Then it hurts. But better honest pain than comfortable lies. Nita smiled. But I don't think that's what your truth will be. I've seen how you look at her. I've seen how she looks at you. The ceremony didn't create that. It just cleared the path. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Jake found himself standing in the same spot where he'd found Ayanna 7 days earlier. She had asked him to meet her there at sunset. To bring his answer. His heart hammered as he climbed the ridge. The desert was painted gold and amber, the same colors as that first night. But everything else was different now. He was different. Ayanna stood near the edge, wearing the same white dress she'd worn that first night, but clean now, pristine, glowing in the fading light. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and she looked like something out of a dream. "Jake," she said softly as he approached. "Ayanna. Thank you for coming. For giving us, these 7 days. Thank you for walking into that desert," he replied. "For being brave enough to let yourself be found." She smiled, but he could see the nervousness in her eyes. She was as scared as he was, he realized. As uncertain about his answer. Somehow, that made him braver. "The ceremony has one final element," she said. "One question that I must ask, and one answer that you must give. There's no wrong answer, Jake. Only the truth." "I understand." She took a deep breath. "Jake Morgan, I walked into the desert seeking my match. You brought me home when I was vulnerable. You cared for me without asking for anything in return. You opened your life to me, let me see who you really are. These 7 days, we've lived as partners. We've worked together, laughed together, learned each other's stories. And now I need to know." She paused, and he saw her hands trembling. "Does your heart recognize mine? When you look at me, do you see your future? When you imagine tomorrow, am I in it?" The question hung in the air between them, as real and solid as the red rocks beneath their feet. Jake thought about the week they'd shared. The easy companionship. The growing attraction that he tried to deny but couldn't. The way his house had felt like a home for the first time in years. The way he'd started imagining things he'd given up on, Sunday morning sleeping in, someone to share his coffee with, children's laughter echoing through the halls. But more than that, he thought about her. About Ayanna. Not as an abstract concept of partnership, but as herself. Her terrible jokes. The way she hummed while cooking. Her fierce intelligence and fiercer compassion. The way she'd cried when one of his calves was born. The way she'd held his hand when he told her about the day his parents died. He thought about how, 7 days ago, he'd been existing. Going through the motions. And now he was living. Feeling things he'd forgotten he could feel. Yes, he said, and the word came out rough with emotion. God, yes. When I found you on this ridge, I thought I was saving you. But you saved me, Ayana. You walked into my life and reminded me what it feels like to not be alone. These 7 days have been. He stopped, struggling for words. I've been running this ranch by myself for 11 years. I've been fine. But fine isn't enough anymore. Not now that I know what it's like to share it with you. Tears were streaming down her face now. Jake. I'm not finished. He closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. I know this is fast. I know 7 days isn't long enough to know someone completely. But I also know that I want every day after this to learn more. I want to wake up to you making terrible coffee. I want to teach you everything about this land. I want to learn your language and meet your family and be part of your world. I want, his voice broke. I want you to stay. Not because of a ceremony or a tradition. But because you want to. Because you choose this. Choose me. I do choose you, she whispered. I walked into that desert hoping, but not knowing. These 7 days, I've fallen in love with you, Jake Morgan. With your kindness and your strength and your terrible jokes. With the way you talk to your animals like they're your friends. With the way you look at this land like it's a living thing to be respected, not just dirt to be used. I choose you. Every day, I choose you. When they kissed, the sun touched the horizon, painting the world in impossible colors. And Jake felt something shift inside him, something profound and permanent. The loneliness that had been his constant companion for so long simply, released. Let go. Flew away like a bird finally freed from its cage. So what happens now? He asked when they finally pulled apart. Now. Ayana laughed, wiping her tears. Now we go home. We call my grandmother and tell